a lot of your, some of your, oh, gave me a message here. You know, at least a fair number of your essays in the New Yorker and other places are about animals. And I just want to know kind of like your inner driver about writing this. And I want to read this one quote from your first essay in the book. And it says, "I think I'll always have animals, and I think I'll always write about them. Their unknowability challenges me. Our affection for them intrigues me. I resist the urge to anthropomorphize them, but I do think they know something we don't about living elementally. I'm happy to be in their company." So that was just lovely. And I think I got an idea about your, you know, passion for animals, but can you explain what drives you to write about them so extensively?
I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that it's just purely an expression of my affection for them. And I enjoy being around animals. And so being able to do a story that gives me that opportunity is kind of hard to resist. But I also feel that so many of these stories end up touching on big issues, big, interesting human issues. So I'm not a naturalist. I'm not writing about animals in their natural habitat doing natural animal things. I'm really writing a lot about the intersection between animal existence and human existence and how we kind of coexist with this universe of beings that are really different from people. And
Mhm.
it just is such a rich subject. It gives so many opportunities to look at human behavior.
Right. And you obviously got to travel or have traveled far and wide for these stories, you know, Iceland all the way to, I think, Morocco and everywhere else. I was surprised by a few facts that I learned. One of, I guess, probably the fact that pigeons are sort of the original war animal. Can you talk about that a little bit? That's an interesting thing. I think most people would not know that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that they're the original, but they're among the original. If you were to think about the very first war animal, it probably would be horses.
Horse, yeah, horse, right.
Yeah. But pigeons, World War I is sometimes known as the animals war because there were so many animals that were used in World War I, which in itself is a fascinating bit of history. Pigeons were very effective as a means for getting information across enemy lines. It is a sort of incredible thought that they would put little vials with messages on pigeons' legs and then let them loose to go back to headquarters to deliver these messages. And many times it was very um, really important information. Troops sending information about where they were located. um, there was also something, and I'm not sure if this is apocryphal or real.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that I came across this in my research. Let's leave an open mind that pigeons were outfitted with little cameras
Yeah.
and they were used to spy on, and take pictures of enemy installations and documents. And I have yet to figure out how that really would have worked and whether it was really and truly factual. But I love the idea.
Right, because he would have to be sort of hovering, wouldn't he? Just a
Well,
hovering pigeon.
yeah, the picture I saw, the pigeon was sort of walking around on a desktop. And the thing is, how do you teach a pigeon to push a shutter? So I'm I would say I have an open mind about whether that was true or not, but it was certainly in the category of evidence that pigeons are very valuable.
Right, right. Well, some other things that surprised me, or one other thing that really surprised me, was about the rabbit pandemic. And I'm sure the people listening, maybe they're aware that there's a rabbit pandemic, but I certainly was not aware that while we're going through a pandemic, so is the rabbit world.
Well, that was certainly what interested me about that story. I mean, I think it would have been an interesting story regardless. And the basics is that there is a highly, highly contagious, almost always fatal virus that is traveling through the global population of rabbits. And it would have been an interesting story in any time, but we are living in a period of history where the word virus, instantly catches your attention. And when I heard about this, I thought that's really uncanny, the parallels between COVID and this disease, which is known as rabbit hemorrhagic disease. Like COVID, it originated in China. Like COVID, it's incredibly contagious. Like COVID, it had a vaccine was developed for it, but there are a lot of anti-vaxxers in the rabbit community for reasons that are actually interesting and complicated morally, because the vaccine for rabbits is made by infecting a rabbit with this disease. And then when that rabbit dies, it's the serum from its liver is used for a vaccine.
Right.
So there are a number of rabbit lovers who have just decided that they can't morally justify using a vaccine that was made by killing another rabbit. So it's a very complicated story.
Yeah. Well,
really
all of these worlds that you take us into, and all the, what from show dogs to Keiko / Free Willy or Willy, all the worlds have their own total microcosm of ideas and philosophies. And the rabbit one is really interesting in the sense that you did point out that out of all the animals, this is one of the, well, you said the only one that we both have, or that we have as pets, that we eat sometimes. People eat rabbits, and where, we all those things. And that's a very interesting quandary. Like, how if you have a rabbit as a pet, then I guess you would never wear a rabbit, fur or something. But did you find a lot of sort of those kinds of conflicts within different industries in the animal world?
Yeah, well, rabbits are very special because of the fact that they do exist in this odd, midpoint.
Yeah.
Where if someone tells you they have rabbits, you don't know automatically if that means, oh, they have a rabbit as a pet, or whether they're raising them to eat.
Right.
And both are equally likely.
Yeah.
And we certainly have animals that we eat, but we generally don't keep them as pets. There may be people who become affectionate and attached to their livestock, but it's still different from an animal that lives in your house,
right,
that you treat as an extension of your family. And the people who keep rabbits as pets, it's as much a pet to them as our dogs are.
Right.
And I think most people who have dogs would not feel comfortable eating a dog.
No, no, definitely not. So in terms of surprises, when you were researching these various essays, was there some particular fact or situation that really surprised you the most or a lot when you found it out?
I would say, well, there were surprises in every story, really.
Right.
I would say one story that began because it was a surprise was the story about taxidermy.
Oh,
Because, I had no idea that, I assumed there were a few people here and there who did taxidermy. And I had no idea that it was this big popular hobby that has competitions and a magazine and that really exists as a pursuit for probably thousands of people. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's certainly more than I expected, and that really surprised me.
okay.
That was like as unexpected as anything I can think of.
And just for people who are listening, the descriptions in that essay of the things that are taxidermied, and the winner of the contest, I guess, were birds, which sounded quite beautiful and lovely. And Susan also describes someone who did a whole landscape inside a coyote. Was that a landscape inside a coyote?
Yeah,
Wow.
that was probably, of anything that I've seen or experienced in the course of working on the pieces in this book, that was probably the one that was the biggest jaw drop, where I thought, I don't even understand this. I don't
Right.
even, what it was a recreation of the destruction of the World Trade
Oh,
Center,
that's right. That's right. Oh,
complete with firefighters and piles of rubble. And this was, it was a taxidermied coyote, but instead of having his stomach intact, it was made to be open. And then this World Trade Center kind of diorama was in his stomach.
I
And
mean,
it
that's
was,
incredible. That's incredible.
it was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen,
Oh my God.
ever.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I was impressed by the sophistication of the model,
Right.
but it was absolutely baffling.
Even the thought process that goes behind creating something like that, it's very interesting that someone would think to do that, like to,
Yeah, well, I mean, that was part of it, is that I couldn't quite understand what the symbolism was. But it the experience of writing about taxidermy in general often had me kind of astonished,
yeah.
because I saw things that I never imagined
Wow.
seeing.
Wow.
Um, but it was well, I feel very lucky, because I would, I really do feel like I get to do and learn about things that are fascinating.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating to read about it. And I was picturing you in all these places that you were describing. And I was thinking, wow, what a fun job is that? Let me ask you, in your essay, The Lion Whisperer, which is about Kevin Richardson, the guy who basically lives with a pride of lions in Africa, you write, how we interact with animals has preoccupied philosophers, poets, and naturalists for ages. With their parallel but unknowable lives, animals offer us relationships that exist in the realm of silence and mystery, distinct from the relationships we have with others of our own species. So that was just very thought-provoking writing. And it made me wonder how your own relationship and perception with and to animals has changed over, let's say, the last 20 years or so. I know you had a farm, or a homestead in New York, and now you're in LA, so not as many animals, but I would think that your original thoughts around animals from then to now might have changed somehow.
Yeah, I think the more that I was learning in each of these stories, the information that I share with the reader was, in almost every case, new information to me. So there was very much a learning process going on. And one thing that I learned a lot about and that really changed me was learning about the problematic nature of captivity. And, as somebody who always liked going to zoos because I like animals, the more I learned, the more I began to feel like I couldn't, in good conscience, support the idea of keeping wild animals in captivity. And people will object and say, oh, but children love them, and they do research, and all of those arguments are perfectly legitimate and have merit. But at the end of the day, the more I learned, the more I began to feel like it is not a sustainable moral position. And we have the incredible benefit now, and this is of course, it's something, when you say in the San Diego area, because San Diego obviously has an extraordinary zoo.
And a
But
wild animal park.
Yeah,
the park where they roam,
And I'm not saying this to point a finger, but there are certain facts of captivity that are unavoidable and problematic. Once you learn those facts, and I would say that even people in the zoo world wouldn't dispute those facts.
Right.
And in many cases, they're really troubled by those facts because they're troubling facts. And I think people who run zoos and work in zoos really love animals, but they'll be the first ones to tell you that it's a problem that there are too many zoo animals.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere for them
to go. I'm not a zoo goer myself for the very reasons that you're talking about. I'm a lifelong animal person too, and seeing them in cages doesn't make me feel good. So I can imagine that people who work there have a lot of conflicted feelings about it.
Yeah, and I think what I imagine would be the way to proceed would be to first think about maintaining 3 or 4 really excellent zoos nationally, and begin slowly to shut down smaller zoos, many of which they simply don't have the money to have a really great environment for animals.
Right.
And then, work toward a future where we enjoy incredible videos of animals in their habitat.
I love it. That's such a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, who knows if that will ever come about, but I do think when you look at what happened with orcas and the fact that we will not be seeing orcas in captivity going forward. So it's not out of the question that people will begin applying that same thinking to other animals.
Well, I would certainly love to see that happen myself. Yeah, I mean, just one thing about that too is for the people listening, in the chapter on the lion whisperer, you do reveal and talk a lot about sort of the lion cub petting situation that goes on, where you can go places and pet lion cubs, and how that really changes their entire life, for the worse, to have been that closely involved with humans at that age. And that was very poignant to me, very sad to, so that was.
And the one thing I want to say is I really understand the impulse to want to touch a lion, and that's human. I mean, that's human nature. the idea of being near one of these beautiful animals, and particularly a dangerous animal that is young enough that you could actually handle it.
Right,
So
right,
I am not beyond that. And I think most of us would agree that it's a very natural thing to
right,
want to do something that's so compelling. But when you begin to learn about what that means for that animal's
right,
life, you
right,
begin thinking, well, maybe that's not, maybe I have to resist my urge and desire to pet that lion cub, because
right,
it's really not a good, the
right.
outcome is not good.
Not good. Yes, right. And you know, and on a more uplifting note, you do note that animals have the power to make things that are mundane seem enchanting. And I, of course, agree with you 100%. What would you say within your group of essays would be a moment where you saw an animal make make a moment really way more special than it would have been had the animal not been there?
Well, the thing that comes to mind really is being in Morocco and seeing this city of Fez, which
Oh,
really is powered entirely by donkeys,
donkeys, right.
and seeing mundane tasks like delivering television sets being done by a donkey. And, there is something amazing about that makes it, I don't think if we see a truck from Best Buy delivering a TV, you don't think, oh, how wonderful. It's just ordinary life. There's nothing special. Seeing it done in a way that really is very ancient and humble, I think is made it seem really magical to
Right.
me.
You mentioned electronics being, hyper modern in this old city with this traditional moving equipment of a donkey. So it's bringing these elements, disparate elements together that must have been visually stunning.
Absolutely. And the sort of unlikeliness of the ancient and the modern being brought together was pretty extraordinary. And
Right.
obviously the city of Fez is a completely magical place. Everything that goes on there is very special.
Right.
It's an incredibly gorgeous place that's a World Heritage Site. It's an amazing place.
Wow. Yeah.
So the donkeys are part of that landscape of wonderment.
Hmm.
And they're an element of it that is really unchanged for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
And that makes it very affecting
Yeah.
and kind of marvelous.
Yes. I can totally understand that. You mentioned something that I've always believed about dogs. I mean, about a lot of animals, but in this case, you were talking about dogs. They're just pure love we feel for them. And then inevitably they break our hearts because their lifespans are shorter than ours. So we outlive our pets usually. And I know you were heartbroken when your chickens were attacked by a raccoon and they all did not survive. So I'm wondering how you've learned to sort of cope with the loss that having animals in your life inevitably brings.
That's a great question. And I'm afraid there is no solution. I think that unless you decide you're only going to have parrots and macaws that live, and
70
tortoises
years, yeah.
that outlive you,
Hmm.
you will be in a position, and a lot of animals like chickens have, even if my chickens hadn't been attacked by a raccoon, the chickens have a short lifespan. I think, maybe 6 years is pretty ancient for a chicken. you're going to outlive them. And if you feel an attachment to them, I think anybody who has a dog or cat knows this painfully, that there is no way to make that better. And it doesn't matter if you're on your fifth dog or your first dog. Recently, our dog was getting to be a senior, and so we got a puppy thinking, well, we don't want to lose her and have no dog. But the fact is that when her time comes, it'll be just as bad because she is an individual. It's not like saying, well, I sold my car and I got another car. It's she's irreplaceable. And I think there's no way around it. There's no way to make it better. And I guess you just have to look at it as the price you pay for the pleasure of having pets.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. It's the only way you can look at it. Otherwise, you would never have an animal. So on a slightly different subject, I would like to ask you, I read The Orchid Thief in the library, and just wondering how you select your subject matter to turn into a book, versus an essay, let's say. How would you, is it just something that you're just intrigued by, or?
Well, it can really vary. The Orchid Thief began as a story for the New Yorker, and I wrote it as a story, and it was published, and I couldn't let it go. I felt like there was so much more that I wanted to say. Mm-hmm. And even though the subject seemed so unlikely for a book, I felt convinced that there was a book there. Yeah. When I started working on the library book, I knew immediately that it couldn't be a magazine piece, that it was there were too many strands and too many stories and too many time frames. And I knew right away that it made sense as a book as opposed to a magazine story. Also, the sort of narrative event that took place in the library book took place in 1986.
Right, the fire.
So it would have been odd to revisit that in a magazine piece now for without any new information coming forward. Whereas in a book, I think you remove that need for it to be timely. You can say, well, I'm looking at this event that took place in 1986 because it's fascinating.
Right.
And it doesn't matter that it took place 20 years ago.
Power of books.
Right. I mean, they kind of transcend the moment.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Right. So I have to ask you what it's like working at the New Yorker. Every writer's dream. I wondered, is it high pressured? Is it fun? I can only assume it's super rewarding and inspiring.
Yeah, well, it's all of those. Every single thing you said, it's all of those. It's incredibly rewarding. It feels like a place that really reveres writing.
Yeah.
And writers. Mm-hmm. And while you would think that's true of all magazines and newspapers, that's not necessarily the main focus of a lot of other publications. The New Yorker is unique in that that's very clearly its primary mission is to look for great writing. And while the magazine covers the events of the moment, that is never the pressure.
Right.
It's amazing to work somewhere that has that kind of tradition. I used to go into the library when I first started working at the magazine, and I would go into the magazine's library and flip through the old scrapbooks from A.J. Liebling and Joseph Mitchell and the original magazine publication of Hiroshima.
Right.
And you know, I mean, you can't even begin to count the number of great writers that have passed through the magazine. So, you know, that can be extremely intimidating. It also can be really inspiring.
Yeah. Well, I'm a 40-year subscriber. I have 3 New Yorker cartoons on my office walls here as we speak. And I just love it. And I tell people I read, you know, things I normally wouldn't be necessarily interested in subject wise, but the writing is so great that I read it anyway. So,
Right. And I think that that is what's special about the New Yorker. I mean, a story about a really interesting subject can appear in a lot of different places. And you're going to read it whether the writing is good or not. If it's a subject that, you know, everybody wants to read, and that makes sense.
yeah.
You're reading it for the information.
Mhm.
I think the New Yorker is at its best when you find yourself deep in a story on a subject you never dreamed you would be
Exactly.
interested in,
Yeah.
and you come away from it really thrilled that you did it, and
Right.
thrilled that you read it, and eager to tell other people to read it. And um, you look at the world a little differently
Mhm.
once you experience that. I think realizing and renewing your own capacity to be surprised
Right.
and to read something that was so unlikely that you
Yeah.
never dreamed you would care about, and find that you can be drawn in and
Totally.
intrigued.
Happens to me every week, so I know that you're saying the truth about that. So I want to ask you, when you're writing, just because I think it's interesting to know, like if I take a break from work, I watch K-pop videos, because I'm like a little bit obsessed with K-pop. So what do you do, non-book related and non-writing related, to take a fun brain break?
I do a couple things. One is I love to go for hikes, and living in Los Angeles, there are a million great places to go hiking. Play with my dogs. I love to garden, and I find one of my favorite breaks is just to be in the garden weeding, which sounds very mundane, but it's very restful. I
Very
love to cook.
zen, isn't it zen to be sort of
Yeah,
doing
it's
what you're,
very
yeah.
zen, and I love to cook.
Mhm.
Um, so I love to read. So I do a lot of reading in the time when I'm not working. That's certainly something that I love.
Okay, very good. Those are all really great. And I am going to ask you 1.5 more questions. Julie said to ask one more. I have 1.5, and then we'll open it up for the audience. But two things. One is I would like to know, if you were to get a response from a reader to On Animals, just what would be the ideal response? Would you want someone to go, wow, I learned something new? Would you want someone to go, oh my gosh, her writing is just amazing? What would be like your ideal response from a reader?
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I think that my true answer to that is that somebody would say, "Oh my God, the writing is so great." Because
It is.
oh, thank you. I'm thrilled if people learn a lot. I mean, that's definitely one of my ambitions, is for people to come away with their head full of new stuff. But you know, in terms of what would be the most ego gratifying, it would be someone saying, "Wow, I had no interest in this subject, but the writing was so good that
Right.
I read it."
Fabulous. I think that's great. Okay, I'm going to ask you another last question, and then we're going to open up to the audience. But are you able to mention what you are working on now?
Sure. I am doing a bunch of different things. I'm adapting the library book for television.
Wonderful.
I'm I'm writing a memoir, and I am launching a new weekly column for the New Yorker that's going to kick off. It might even be tomorrow, but I may be wrong. It may be next week, but
Does
it's
it
very.
have a particular subject or is it changing?
Yeah, it's obituaries.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm one of those people that when I get the New York Times, I read the obituaries first. So that's interesting. You're going to write a column about obituaries?
No, I'm going to write
You're
obituaries.
going to write obituaries. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's a, you know, obviously a time-honored tradition, and I love reading them. I love the little narratives that they have, and so that's going to be really fun and really interesting.
And how great and special to be able to honor somebody by putting their life into compelling words.
It's amazing to appreciate what an obituary means. And you know, obviously we're not going to compete with the New York Times. We don't have you know, the New York Times has a huge staff of people and researchers, and so this is, you know, going to be select obituaries that are interesting for one reason or another.
Very nice. I really look forward to that for sure. I'm excited to read it. Okay, so those were my main questions, and here comes Julie. And thank you so much for those wonderful answers. It was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you so much.
So much fun. And
Great
Julie,
conversation. We could have gone on and on, but we have
yes.
a couple of things coming on from, so I don't want to, we could go for a couple hours. But one thing that I wanted to ask Susan real quick before we get into those though, and it was so wonderful, Gu talked about coming down to the event. You know, the virtual world's a whole different thing. One of the things, I'm just curious what you miss about live events. I miss maybe seeing you in one of your fabulous dresses. Because you always were. So do you miss putting on those fabulous clothes?
I certainly do. I absolutely do. You know, it was funny because in the fall, I started thinking, oh, I've got to figure out what I'm going to wear on my book tour. I think I need to go shopping. And then suddenly it was, we're doing it virtually. And I thought, oh my God. You know, I love being in front of a live audience. I really enjoy it. I'm glad we have the technology to enable us to do a little tiny version, but I do really miss it terribly. And it's not the same.
It's not, no.
It's, I mean, it just doesn't compare. And, you know, I know people, we may see a future where we do both.
Right.
We do a live event, but also live stream it so that the
Right.
people who aren't comfortable being in a crowd or have gotten used to just watching from home.
Right.
There
is something special. We had Brian Selznick at the store the other day for a small event. And there's just something, it's like being in a theater watching a play. There's just something about being with an author in the room, having them talk to you, that's irreplaceable.
Yeah, it's just, and you know, I also think for all of us, getting dressed, going out, running into friends, you know, it's an experience. It's not merely click in, listen, click off.
Right.
It's an entire experience.
Well, like I said, your dresses.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, it's there's so much that's part of it. And, you know, I mean, this has been really hard for everybody. It's hard to have a book out during COVID, and particularly when you are someone like me who really enjoys doing the live events.
And we thought back when this book came out, we were all thinking, or back when the planning happens for fall releases, when we're looking at like, you know, when it's April, May, and you're looking at the fall to do tours, I was thinking that live stuff was going to be more vibrant.
Me too. I mean, until the very last minute, we
Yeah.
were still planning it in person. And I was very conflicted. I did feel like, is that the right thing to do? What, who knows? And at that moment with the Delta variant kind of raging, I thought, I don't know, is this really the right thing to do? Is it, what?
And I think,
even
I think different parts of the country, there's different feelings about it too.
Right. And I do think it is really different. I just did an event in Denver where there were several hundred people, for whatever reason, people there were comfortable coming out. But I would say I've only done a handful of live events, and none of them have had the numbers
that they were previous.
That I'm normally used to, because I think people are thinking, should I, shouldn't I, is this, or they've gotten out of the habit of it.
Well, I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot to say, because I've experienced that with just the few live events that we've done. The attendance is a fraction of what normally we would have for some names. I mean, a fraction.
Well, I don't want to say anything, but in a week, I'm going to SoFi Stadium to see the aforementioned K-pop band. And there's going to be like 50,000 people.
But here's the thing that I think is the difference, though. And I think there is a different mentality. Like, people have to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
There is a different, I don't know. There's just a different feeling of the concert audience and the book author audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I think it's still very much in flux.
It is.
And,
it is.
I miss it very much, and I feel like I like the experience of not only talking to people in that setting, but also meeting people, and signing books, and
it's just it's a tactile, it's all of it. Okay, well, I'm sorry. So I totally digressed us away from the audience of back to the obituary column that you're going to write. Amanda, in the comment section, she was like excited because there's a book called The Deadbeat. I don't know if you know about it, but that she loved, by Marilyn Johnson.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure. Now I'm a little worried to read. Other people's stuff. Whenever I'm working on something, I tend to avoid reading anything like it, because I feel like it starts feeling too close to
and it kind of worms in your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from Anonymous. Hello, Anonymous. Wondering if Susan took any inspiration for writing this book on animals from any fictional sources, or simply what fiction she's reading for fun or entertainment of late.
Oh, interesting. Well, I take a lot of inspiration from fiction writing, for sure. Not in terms of subject matter, but in terms of craft, in terms of voice, in terms of the freedom that fiction writers experience and exercise in their writing. And I read mostly fiction in my spare time. I just finished The Promise, Damon Galgut, which is so good. I have a book club with Literati, and we're just finishing up the Association of Small Bombs, which is a phenomenal book. The month before that, we read, oh my God, now I'm going to forget. Oh, that's terrible.
I know.
Because we're about to read Patty Clark, by Roddy Doyle.
I have to join that book club. I'm in the Literati Joseph Campbell book club, but I should have joined yours.
Oh, join mine.
I will.
Told that mine's the best.
I think based on books you just named, I'm going to agree.
No, we have really, these are books that I just love, and I feel like the response has been great. People seem to really be enjoying the choices, and they range far and wide, but they're
Yeah.
all just great. I don't know why I'm drawing a complete blank on what we read the month
Just the-
before this. I'm
I know.
sorry.
It's always how
Oh,
that
I
goes.
know why. I do know why. We read on animals.
Oh.
That's why. All right. I'm
Oh.
not losing my mind. Okay.
That's hilarious. Okay, another anonymous. Hello, another anonymous out there. Disregarding your consciousness, is there a certain animal you have not met in person that you'd like to pet or interact with?
Oh, yeah. Well, lately I've been I once actually fed a carrot to an elephant. And I'd love to interact more with elephants. I think they're pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like with the internet, that must have been an interesting, because I think, is this true or not, that there's certain animals and certain ways that the Americans look at animals versus internationally and how they're treated. Is that true?
Oh, sure. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, elephants are work animals in parts of Asia. And, you know, we think of them just as these exotic, extraordinary beings. And they do work in Thailand and Laos, and they're not looked at as being these magical beasts. They're
Mhm.
looked at as, you know, big, strong animals that can drag logs and
do big
but I
things.
think there are a lot of cultural differences. There's no question. I mean, you know, there are cultures in which eating dogs is not at all unusual or strange. And it would be extremely strange in Western culture. And, you know, I was in Peru on a farm that raised guinea pigs for food. And they're a very popular food source in Peru. And, you know, we think of guinea pigs just as pets.
Right,
And
little fluffy animals. Yeah.
had hundreds of guinea pigs. And it was the most bizarre thing when you're used to seeing one guinea pig in a cage in a suburban teenager's room,
Right.
you know, pre-adolescent room. So it's just a very different, you know, each culture has different animals that they prize and that they do not feel particularly attached to. I mean, there's just a big range.
Yeah.
I think there's no animal. I mean, around the world, everyone is afraid of lions. You know, around the world, everyone is afraid of grizzly bears. I mean,
Right.
there are certain animals that we have a pretty uniform attitude towards, but otherwise there can be wide ranges culturally.
Well, we didn't talk about your essay on the movie business or the entertainment business with regards to animals, but that was pretty interesting, knowing how many animals were harmed, you know, in the past in movie making and so on, and how the standards have changed. And now, you know, they have to guarantee that they're not even hurting a flea.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Hollywood treated animals, and particularly horses, as being completely disposable. And you know, there was just no regard for what it meant to put these animals in really dangerous situations and to have to euthanize them after a shoot, you know, after a scene is shot and 5 horses break their legs and they would just be euthanized.
Yeah. So completely changing on that. So you live in LA now. How long did you live in, well, a couple questions. How long have you lived in LA? How long did you live in New York? And do you see yourself going back to New York and working for the magazine? Is that all kind of mixed in?
Well, I've lived in LA now for 10 years, which is a little hard for me to believe because I still feel like a newcomer. I lived in New York for about 20 years, well, if I add New York City and upstate New York, it was really like 25 years. So a long, long time. For the moment, I would have to say that I think we're pretty sweet on Los Angeles. And, I'm lucky because the magazine, it doesn't matter where I live.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
It has never mattered, but it matters even less now that everything can be done so easily. I loved having an office at the New Yorker, and I had an office there for many, many years. And I love having it. I mean, it was wonderful to have that physical connection to the place. But I gave up my office in like 2004. So it's been a long time because I was moving out of New York. And so I haven't had my office there in a long time, and I've gotten used to it.
Okay, so final question. And then thank you. This one's a little more personal. It's a little bit about the COVID thing. So let's talk about Twitter and your popularity on Twitter that happened over COVID. Was that surprising to you? Did you have fun with it?
It was.
I had fun reading the tweets.
It came as a total surprise, complete, utter. I mean, really, if you were to ask me what has been surprising in my sort of public life, because obviously I've had surprises in my personal life, but in my public life, biggest surprise ever. That a kind of drunken reverie would turn into something, I think sometimes when you're on Twitter, you imagine nobody reading it. You're sort of writing to yourself a little bit. So the kind of explosive quality of it completely surprising. And at first I was slightly mortified and thought, oh my God. And then I thought, oh, whatever, as long I didn't hurt anyone's feelings. I didn't say anything I regret. And evidently I was saying something that a lot of people could relate to.
Well, and it must have been kind of a nice feeling too, though, to know that when we're all in this like weird world, you touch so many people in such a great way that gave all of us just this like spark of joy during that time.
It gave me a lot of pleasure looking back on it and thinking, oh my God, I mean, I did this completely unselfconsciously with I wasn't thinking about anything except just rambling. So the impact came as a complete delight, really. I mean, after I woke up in the morning and thought, oh God,
what I do?
Maybe I shouldn't have been on my Twitter account.
Well, we're so happy you were.
Yay, do it again. Please do more.
Susan, it's always such a pleasure having you.
Oh, Julie, thank you. I love Warwick's, and I hope that in the not so distant future, I can be there in person and we can have a blast.
Yes, we will. And Sarah, thank you so much for your great interview and for taking the time to do it. Appreciate it always.
So fun. I love it.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
you so much. And
all right.
Thanks to everyone for coming, and get your holiday shopping done early.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.